The consultant's smirk still haunts me. Brilliant theft, he called it, raising his glass to celebrate stealing my strategy and handing it to my biggest competitor. He thought he'd won. He thought I was too naive, too trusting to fight back. What he didn't know was that I'd already filed the patent 3 months earlier, and his brilliant move was about to become his worst nightmare. My name is Grace Mitchell, and I built my consulting firm from absolutely nothing. No family money, no connections, no safety net. Just me, a laptop that barely functioned, and an idea that I knew could revolutionize how mid-sized manufacturing companies manage their supply chains. I spent 7 years working 80-hour weeks, sleeping on office couches, eating ramen for dinner more nights than I care to remember. Every dollar I made went back into the business. Every client I landed was through sheer persistence and delivering results that nobody else could match. By the time I turned 35, I had something real. Mitchell Strategy Solutions had 23 employees, offices in 3 cities, and a client roster that included some of the most respected names in manufacturing. We weren't the biggest firm, but we had a reputation for innovation. Companies came to us when they wanted actual solutions, not just PowerPoint presentations full of generic advice. The breakthrough came 2 years ago. I'd been working with a client who was hemorrhaging money due to inefficient inventory management. Traditional solutions weren't working because the problem wasn't just about tracking inventory. It was about predicting demand patterns using a completely new algorithmic approach that combined real-time market data with historical purchasing behaviors in ways that hadn't been done before. I spent 18 months developing the framework, testing it, refining it. The results were extraordinary. My client reduced costs by 37% in the first quarter alone. I knew I had something special. Something that could transform the entire industry. So I did what any smart business owner would do. I documented everything meticulously. I filed for patent protection on the algorithmic framework and the specific implementation methodology. I worked with an intellectual property attorney who specialized in business process patents. The application was comprehensive, detailed, and airtight. We filed it in January of that year. Then I made my mistake. I trusted Derek Pearson. Derek came highly recommended. He'd worked for 2 of the top consulting firms in the country before going independent. He had credentials from Harvard Business School, connections throughout the industry, and a reputation for helping companies scale. When he approached me about a potential partnership, I was intrigued. He talked about how my innovation combined with his network could take Mitchell Strategy Solutions to the next level. We could expand nationally, maybe even internationally. He painted a picture of success that was intoxicating. We started working together in March. I brought him in as a senior advisor, paying him a generous retainer to help develop our growth strategy. He needed to understand our core offerings, so I walked him through everything. The traditional services, the new algorithmic approach, the client results, the implementation process. I showed him the documentation, explained the methodology, shared the success metrics. He asked smart questions, took detailed notes, and seemed genuinely impressed. What I didn't know was that he was also having regular meetings with Marcus Chen, the CEO of Velocity Solutions. Velocity was our biggest competitor, a firm 3 times our size with deeper pockets and more aggressive sales tactics. They'd been trying to poach my clients for years, undercutting our prices and making promises they couldn't keep. I'd always managed to hold them off because our results spoke for themselves. But they wanted what we had. They wanted the innovation that was making us stand out. Derek gave it to them. I found out in the worst possible way. One of my longtime clients, a manufacturing company I'd worked with for 4 years, called to cancel their contract. The CEO, Robert Granville, was someone I considered a friend. We'd had dinner with our spouses, celebrated business victories together, built real trust. When his assistant scheduled the call, I assumed it was about expanding our services. Instead, Robert sounded uncomfortable. He thanked me for everything we'd done, praised our results, and then dropped the bomb. Velocity Solutions had approached them with a new service offering that sounded remarkably similar to our algorithmic framework. They were offering it at a significantly lower price point as part of a package deal. He'd already signed the contract. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. I asked him to describe what Velocity had presented. As he talked, my blood ran cold. It wasn't just similar to our framework. It was our framework. The terminology, the implementation steps, even some of the specific case study examples. They changed just enough to make it seem different, but anyone who knew the original work would recognize it immediately. Robert seemed to realize something was wrong. He asked if there was an issue. I told him I needed to look into something and would call him back. Then I spent the next 4 hours going through everything Derek had access to. Every document, every presentation, every piece of proprietary information I'd shared with him. The pattern was obvious once I knew what to look for. Derek had been systematically copying everything. He'd asked for specific files under the guise of needing to understand our processes better. He'd requested access to client databases to help identify growth opportunities. He'd even convinced me to let him sit in on strategy sessions with clients, claiming it would help him understand our approach better. I wanted to throw up. I'd handed him everything on a silver platter. That evening, I called my attorney, Patricia Okonkwo. Patricia had handled the patent filing and knew the framework inside and out. I explained what had happened. She was quiet for a long moment, then asked me to send her everything I had on Derek's involvement and any information I could gather about Velocity's new offering. 2 days later, Patricia called back. She'd done some digging. Velocity Solutions had started marketing their new service 3 weeks earlier. They were calling it the Dynamic Supply Chain Optimization System, but it was essentially my algorithmic framework with some superficial changes. They'd already signed 6 new clients, and according to industry sources, they were planning a major marketing push. But here's where Patricia's voice changed. She reminded me about the patent filing. The application had been published 6 months earlier, which meant it was now public record. More importantly, we'd filed it before Derek ever came into the picture. Before he had access to any of our proprietary information. Before Velocity Solutions had any knowledge of the framework. We had them. Patricia explained the strategy. We would send a cease and desist letter to Velocity Solutions, informing them that their new service infringed on our pending patent. We would demand they immediately stop marketing and implementing the service. And we would make it very clear that we were prepared to file a lawsuit if they didn't comply. I wanted to move immediately, but Patricia advised patience. She wanted to gather more evidence first. She hired a private investigator to document the extent of the infringement. We needed to prove not just that Velocity's service was similar to ours, but that they'd obtained it through Derek's access to our proprietary information. The investigation took 3 weeks. What it uncovered was worse than I'd imagined. Derek had been meeting with Marcus Chen for months before he ever approached me. The entire partnership proposal had been a setup. He'd been paid a substantial consulting fee by Velocity to gain access to our methods and deliver them the framework. Email records showed Derek bragging about how easy it had been to gain my trust. In one message, he called the whole operation a brilliant theft and joked about how naive I'd been. Reading those emails was like swallowing broken glass. Someone I'd trusted, someone I'd welcomed into my business and shared my work with, had deliberately betrayed me for money. He'd smiled to my face while stealing everything I'd built. But the emails also gave us everything we needed. Clear evidence of intentional theft. Proof that Velocity Solutions knew they were using stolen intellectual property. Documentation of the entire conspiracy. Patricia prepared the cease and desist letter. It was 23 pages long and included detailed evidence of the patent filing, the infringement, and the theft. We sent it to Velocity Solutions on a Thursday afternoon, with copies to Derek and to every client they'd signed using the stolen framework. The response was immediate and dramatic. Marcus Chen called me directly the next morning. His tone was aggressive, almost threatening. He claimed that Velocity had developed their system independently. He said our patent was too broad to hold up and that we were making baseless accusations. He suggested that if we pursued legal action, they would countersue for defamation and tortious interference with their business relationships. I let him talk. When he finally stopped, I said just one sentence: "See you in court." Then I hung up. Patricia had warned me they would try to intimidate us. Large companies with big legal budgets often used aggressive tactics to scare smaller firms into backing down. But we had the evidence, we had the patent filing, and we had right on our side. The lawsuit hit the news within days. Technology and business publications picked up the story. A small consulting firm taking on a major competitor over stolen intellectual property made for compelling headlines. I started getting calls from journalists, other business owners who'd had similar experiences, and even some of Velocity's other competitors who were interested in what we'd uncovered. The publicity had an unexpected effect. 3 of the 6 clients Velocity had signed using the stolen framework contacted me directly. They'd seen the news coverage and recognized elements of the work they'd previously seen from us. They wanted to know if they were at risk of being sued for using the infringing service. Patricia and I made a strategic decision. We offered those clients a way out. If they terminated their contracts with Velocity and came back to Mitchell Strategy Solutions, we would provide them the legitimate service at a discounted rate and guarantee they'd face no legal consequences. All 3 accepted within a week. Velocity was hemorrhaging. Their major new service offering was now toxic. Potential clients were backing away because nobody wanted to invest in a solution that might be tied up in litigation for years. Their stock price dropped 11% in 2 weeks. Meanwhile, Derek Pearson was frantically trying to distance himself from the entire situation. He sent me a personal email claiming that he'd had no idea Velocity was going to use the information he'd shared inappropriately. He said he'd simply been having general industry discussions with Marcus Chen and that any similarities between the frameworks were purely coincidental. It was pathetic. We had his emails bragging about the theft. We had payment records showing exactly how much Velocity had paid him. We had timestamps proving he'd downloaded proprietary files from our servers and forwarded them to his personal email address. His denials were worthless. But then Derek did something I hadn't anticipated. He filed a lawsuit against me. His complaint was audacious in its absurdity. He claimed that I had defamed him by accusing him of theft. He argued that the information he'd shared with Velocity was based on his own expertise and experience, not on proprietary information from my firm. He demanded damages for harm to his reputation and loss of future business opportunities. Patricia almost laughed when she read the filing. She called it a desperate attempt to create leverage for a settlement. Derek couldn't win the lawsuit, but he could make the litigation more expensive and time-consuming. He was hoping I'd agree to drop the case against Velocity in exchange for him dropping his case against me. I told Patricia I wasn't interested in settling anything. We were going to fight both cases and win both cases. The discovery process was brutal but illuminating. Velocity Solutions was required to turn over internal communications related to the development of their new service. What emerged was a clear timeline of Derek's involvement. Meeting notes, email chains, file transfers. Everything documented. They'd even created a project plan specifically for integrating the stolen framework into their service offerings. The most damning evidence came from a presentation Derek had given to Velocity's executive team. The slide deck was almost identical to one I'd created for internal training purposes. Same structure, same examples, same analytical approach. He'd barely bothered to change the formatting. As the evidence mounted, Velocity's legal strategy shifted. They stopped denying the infringement and started arguing about the validity of the patent itself. They brought in expert witnesses who claimed the algorithmic framework was too obvious to deserve patent protection. They argued that similar approaches had been used in other industries, and that I was simply applying known techniques to a new context. Patricia was ready for this. We had our own expert witnesses who explained exactly what made the framework innovative. The combination of specific data inputs, the unique weighting algorithms, the real-time adjustment mechanisms. These weren't obvious applications of existing techniques. They were genuinely new approaches that I'd spent years developing and testing. The court battles stretched across 9 months. Depositions, motions, expert testimony, document reviews. It consumed enormous amounts of time and money. There were moments when I questioned whether it was worth it. The legal fees were approaching 6 figures. The stress was affecting my health and my ability to focus on running the business. But I couldn't let it go. This wasn't just about money or market share. It was about principle. Derek and Velocity had stolen my work, betrayed my trust, and tried to destroy what I'd built. If I backed down, I'd be sending a message that such behavior was acceptable, that people could take advantage of smaller firms without consequences. My team at Mitchell Strategy Solutions rallied around me. Employees who could have jumped ship to more stable companies chose to stay. They worked extra hours to keep clients happy while I was distracted by litigation. They spread the word about what had happened, turning the theft into a rallying cry about protecting innovation and punishing corporate misconduct. The turning point came during Marcus Chen's deposition. Patricia questioned him for 7 hours, methodically walking through every decision, every meeting, every communication related to the stolen framework. Marcus was arrogant at first, dismissive of our claims and confident in his company's position. But Patricia was relentless. She showed him emails he'd forgotten about. She confronted him with timeline inconsistencies in his testimony. She got him to admit that Velocity had never done any independent development work on the framework. They'd simply taken what Derek provided and repackaged it. By the end of the deposition, Marcus was visibly shaken. He'd realized that his company's entire defense was crumbling. There was no way to explain away the mountain of evidence showing deliberate theft. 2 weeks later, Velocity Solutions requested a settlement conference. The negotiation took place in a conference room in downtown Chicago. Marcus Chen, his attorneys Patricia, and I sat around a polished table while neutral mediator tried to find common ground. Velocity's opening offer was insulting. They proposed a licensing agreement where they could continue using the framework in exchange for a modest royalty payment. They wanted to avoid admitting any wrongdoing and to continue benefiting from what they'd stolen. I rejected it immediately. Patricia laid out our counterproposal. Velocity would pay $7.5 million in damages. They would issue a public statement acknowledging the infringement and apologizing. They would immediately cease using the framework and notify all current clients. And they would terminate any business relationship with Derek Pearson. Marcus tried to negotiate down, but we had all the leverage. The evidence was overwhelming. If the case went to trial, Velocity would almost certainly lose, and the damages could be even higher. The negative publicity would continue to damage their reputation. They were bleeding clients and market value. After 6 hours of negotiation, they agreed to our terms with minor modifications. The final settlement was $7.2 million, plus the public acknowledgement and the cease and desist requirements. Derek's lawsuit against me collapsed shortly after. With the settlement making Velocity's infringement undeniable, his defamation claims had no foundation. His attorneys quietly withdrew the complaint, and Derek disappeared from the industry. Last I heard, he'd moved to a different state and was working in a completely unrelated field. The settlement money changed everything for Mitchell Strategy Solutions. I used it to expand the team, open new offices, and invest in additional research and development. We developed new frameworks and methodologies, all properly protected by patents and trade secrets. The publicity from the case had made us nationally recognized. Companies reached out wanting to work with a firm that had successfully defended its innovation against a much larger competitor. Within 18 months of the settlement, our annual revenue had tripled. We had offices in 7 cities and a team of over 60 consultants. The algorithmic framework that Derek had tried to steal became the foundation of a comprehensive suite of services that transformed how manufacturing companies approach supply chain management. But the real victory wasn't financial. It was about justice. Derek Pearson had thought he could betray my trust and get away with it. Velocity Solutions had thought they could crush a smaller competitor by stealing rather than innovating. They'd both learned that theft has consequences. I still think about that moment when I first heard Derek bragging about his brilliant theft, the casual cruelty of it. The assumption that I was too weak or too naive to fight back. He'd underestimated me completely. He wasn't the first person to make that mistake, and he probably won't be the last. But everyone who's heard the story knows now that Grace Mitchell doesn't back down. She fights. And she wins. Robert Granville, the client who'd first alerted me to the theft, called me 6 months after the settlement. His company had terminated their contract with Velocity after the infringement became public. He asked if Mitchell Strategy Solutions would consider taking them back as a client. I agreed, but at full price. The discount period had ended. The office where Derek used to work as an advisor was converted into a conference room. We named it the Innovation Protection Center. It's where we hold meetings about intellectual property strategy, where we train new employees on the importance of safeguarding proprietary information, and where we remind ourselves that trust must be earned and verified. On the wall, we hung a framed copy of the patent certificate for the algorithmic framework. Below it, there's a small plaque with a quote I chose: "Innovation belongs to those who create it, not to those who steal it." Every time I walk past that room, I remember the fear I felt when I first discovered the theft. The anger, the betrayal, the doubt about whether I could actually win against a much larger company with unlimited resources. And then I remember how it felt to stand in that conference room and watch Marcus Chin agree to our settlement terms. To know that we'd fought and won. The consulting industry talks about the case as a cautionary tale now. What happened to Velocity Solutions and Derek Pearson is taught in business school ethics classes. It's referenced in articles about intellectual property protection. It's become a reminder that in business, as in life, there are still consequences for betrayal. My company continues to grow. We're working with clients across 12 countries now, implementing frameworks and strategies that we've developed and properly protected. Every patent we file, every trade secret we safeguard, every confidentiality agreement we enforce is a continuation of the same fight. People sometimes ask if I regret trusting Derek initially, if I wish I'd been more suspicious, more guarded, less willing to share information. The answer is complicated. Yes, the betrayal hurt. Yes, I should have been more careful. But I also know that business requires some degree of trust. Innovation requires collaboration. Growth requires taking risks with people. What I don't regret is fighting back. I don't regret spending the money on legal fees, investing the time in litigation, enduring the stress and uncertainty. Because the alternative was accepting defeat. It was letting someone else profit from my work while I watched helplessly. That was never an option. Not for me. Not ever. Grace Mitchell built her company on innovation, hard work, and results. When someone tried to take that away through theft and deception, she proved that brilliance isn't about how cleverly you can steal. It's about what you create yourself and how fiercely you protect it. The consultant thought he'd won with his brilliant theft. He was wrong. The only thing brilliant was watching his scheme fall apart when the patent he didn't know existed crushed everything he'd built on lies.